welcome back. And we're moving into our first segment this morning. I'm joined at this time by my co-host, Kevin Arthurs. And we're having a conversation with business Senator Mark Lizarraga, to talk about the decriminalization of marijuana, what it means, and specifically your position as presented in the Senate last week. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning to you both. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Senator, so this is the hot topic and has been for quite some time. And I want to start off because we're going to talk a bit about your position as you had presented it and some of the highlighted concerns. But most importantly, I think it's always very important to establish how you prepared this position in conjunction with the business community.
Well, obviously, one seeks consultation with professionals in the field, medical people. We sought the advice from these professionals, and they guided us to quite a bit of studies that have been done in the area from recognized institutions. So my presentation was focused primarily, while I had other concerns, my focus was primarily on the health and the impact it would have on our children, on young people.
Yeah.
There was a committee which was headed, I think, by Mr. Doug Singh. I believe I saw him. Was part of the consultation process a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce?
Actually, we wrote that committee with a list of concerns. The Chamber had sent them a list of concerns by letter, which was unanswered, which was never answered. So let's put that on the table.
So you had in fact been expressing these concerns before the passage of the bill?
From the committee was set up, we asked a whole series of questions, a whole host of questions that remains unanswered to this day.
The CEO in the Ministry of Human Development, I believe, was on the news recently, and she was saying that a lot of their concerns were in fact, in terms of the impact that it would have on children, was in fact accepted by a cabinet, and that there was some documentation. Are you aware of?
No, I'm not. Okay. No, I'm not. And I don't know what concerns they expressed, really. We as well quoted from two studies in my presentation that were done by Government of Belize ministries. And they raised some concerns about drug use in general and the impact of that this was having on our young people. We highlighted those. But no, I'm not familiar with what it is you're talking about, and I would really say that I haven't seen much in the piece of legislation that was passed that to me would seriously and meaningfully have an impact on exposure by kids to this drug. I mean, we questioned that. As a matter of fact, we said it fell way short of stopping the exposure of marijuana to our kids.
Let me get to the very basic question here. Does the business community support the current amendment as it has been passed in the House?
Yes and no. Yes and no. That was, at the end of the day, that was our position. We certainly, we started out by saying we knew that this was going to pass. It had bipartisan support. That's one. But we also acknowledged that this was a drug, and drug use and the supply of drug. We have laws that govern certain types of drugs, cannabis being one of them. And so we certainly took the position that any exposure by your populace to drugs should be regulated. There should be standards, quality controls, a whole host of other issues. And we certainly, again, took the position that while the original intent was decriminalization, this went beyond. In fact, you're the attorney, you can help me out legally. One could even argue that it has been legalized under certain circumstances. It's now legal to smoke marijuana in your homes, in a hotel room with permission, etc. So it has legalized certain actions with the use of this drug. And we also believe that it failed miserably to address supply. And at the same time, we have heard government officials clearly link this spike in murders to supply-related issues in the marijuana trade. So we have a lot of questions. We have more questions than answers. And we certainly do not take the position that our children have been sufficiently protected either from first-hand access or second-hand exposure.
Let's unpack that position. You speak of being in support but with concerns. You say yes and no. What is it about the legislation that you do support?
We do not believe that a young person, or any person for that matter, because of an addiction, or because of a curiosity, or because of experimentation, should be tarnished with a criminal record. We even suggest that perhaps the time has come for drugs in this country and the use of or abuse of drugs, because while these are all drugs and while all drugs may have some benefits under certain conditions, under supervised or regulated conditions, we believe that perhaps the misuse, the abuse of drugs for just addictive or whatever other purposes you may want to classify them as, that we should begin to look at this now in a new light, and perhaps not only a legal light, but perhaps a medical light. You know, many countries today, the new thing is to take the approach that it is a medical issue, not solely a legal issue, and offer people help, counseling or whatever services that should come along with anybody that has this need for a crutch or need for a drug to fill themselves on a daily basis. So we also threw that out.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you are speaking of the impact on, which has been widely explained as a part of the justification for the amendment, that you want to stop what is happening with a marginalized community of young people in this country because of what may be an addiction or some form of abuse.
Yes.
So you support it
Certainly.
in that way?
We certainly believe that that person should not carry a lifelong scar, legal scar, so to speak. We certainly believe that the crime, there's a saying about the price and the crime, and it doesn't ring right now, but you know, we believe that it is excessive, the penalties that were imposed for a curious, again, we're focusing primarily on the youth here. A young person gets caught, he's sent to prison. We're not sure that he comes out truly reformed, rehabilitated, or even helped. So there are lots of questions with that stigma, you know, from smoking weed. I mean, so
for clarity's sake, for clarity's sake, the legislation does not make it legal for minors to have in their possession, neither to use any substance.
We understand that totally, and we said that what it does is it exposes them, in our view, to not only the product, right, but the second-hand smoke. Now it's okay to smoke it in your yard, to smoke it in your house, and it exposes them. We referred to quite an intensive list of studies that clearly show, and And I'm alarmed that some of my colleagues chose to even question the validity of the studies, which I readily agreed to share with them. But the evidence now is clear, increasingly, that exposure to marijuana smoke, especially in people below the age of 25, it affects the development and the performance of your brain. That's scientific data. I'm not qualified to argue against. That scientific data was pointed to us by people in the medical community. I think it's a fallacy to hear people say, well, they're exposed to alcohol, that's legal. Or, well, they're exposed to cigarettes, that's legal. Our conversation or debate was not on what's better or what's less worse. Let's use those words, right? Our conversation was on this matter and the effects that this would have on the young people. We absolutely agree that both studies done by the local authorities highlighted the fact that access to alcohol was even more than access to marijuana. Did we speak about it in our debate? No, because we weren't debating alcohol at that time, but we agree. We totally agree that a lot more needs to be done in our country to address the misuse or the use of all drugs by young people, by everybody.
Now the amendment,
but specifically by young people.
Yes, but the amendment does provide some protection for young people in terms of maintaining the law and the illegal aspect or the criminal aspect of the possession law.
What the law does
for within school areas and for a certain age limit.
Please, we question that as well.
Why?
Right? Because we believe that it's a fallacy to believe that when this thing was totally illegal across the board, totally illegal, remember, you could go to jail, that children had access to it, and the statistics proved, the same government of Belize statistics proved how many of our kids were exposed to it when it was illegal, when you could be charged and sent to jail for trafficking. Now the law is saying that you can be in a school area, have more than the 10 grams or correct me if I'm wrong, have in your possession marijuana, the first instance you'll get a warning, right? And we're saying if you're in a school environment and you have to carry marijuana, the chances are that you're going to be selling that marijuana to somebody. We believe that a warning is way too light. And we question the logistics of how that warning system is going to work.
If I could just switch a little, because
Sure.
the purpose of the church senator is to bring the views of the church to the body of the Senate. And the business community's representative senator is to bring the business, I would assume, a view to the country. What I was interested in is...
Let me put a stop right there. I disagree with you.
But,
and let me clarify, please.
sure.
Because when I took an oath to uphold, protect, defend the laws and constitution of this country, so help me God, without fear or favor.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay? So it is entirely possible for me to vote my conscience, to express my conscience as well.
Absolutely.
Right? So
Absolutely.
that does not preclude me
Absolutely.
from having a social conscience. It does not preclude me from having a moral conscience.
Yes.
So I don't know where you were going with the comment about the church versus the
Sure.
business, and that
No,
it was
no.
almost as if you were implying that I should be limited in my
No,
presentation.
absolutely.
Okay.
Not, absolutely. We surely value your views in terms of, I was doing some research before we came on, and I realized that probably the only other person who has been publicly against, because there's been some sort of unity out there on this issue, is Mr. Richard Harris. There's an article by him where he was saying that possibly some of what we're doing now isn't the best. But my question didn't end there. The question was really one of the business community. Surely you have expertise in business, you're a businessman, and so you bring that expertise to the house along with your moral conscience. But my question was, the legislation is only one half of, eventually, as you're saying, this is what is going to happen, of a decriminalization process. My question was, during the consultations with your body, were there any discussions as to the business structure that has to be grown up beside the legal decriminalization?
But business where? What type of business? The only business opportunities that this piece of legislation presented was that because the definition of marijuana has changed, there's no room for interested parties to get into the hemp
industry.
Okay? And we welcome that. In our presentation, we said, but it needs to be regulated again. And this is why we said, look, there's so many questions that need to be answered that perhaps it would have been better if the regulations would have been presented along with the piece of legislation. That, to me, would have cleared up a lot. But like so many things in Belize, the way we do things, you know, anyhow, and I questioned that as well. So there wasn't an opportunity to look at it from a... I called the Attorney General and he schooled me. He said, look, medical marijuana, because I said many countries, as a first step, what they do is they open the doors recognizing that there is a medical benefit for many people. And he said, but medical marijuana is legal in Belize. I highlighted that. I didn't know that. And apparently it's been on the books for a long time. Nobody has gotten to it. So it leads then, the question, it leads you to ask, well then maybe there isn't a huge medical need for marijuana in this country, because if there's demand, you think supply would follow. Now we've seen that there's a huge demand for illegal marijuana, right? And the criminal aspects of that. But certainly, again, as any drug, it's entirely possible that you can benefit from it for whatever ailment that you may have, you know, but it should be supervised, regulated, the potency, the dosage, whatever. Your access should be regulated. And we recognize that, and we acknowledged it.
Looking at the where the legislation is now, but the question is really more focused on where it could end up from a business standpoint, and whether or not, for example, in Jamaica, the legal process in Jamaica has gone a bit beyond just the decriminalization of small amounts, and they're looking at licenses for dispensaries, etc., etc. So my question, just to bring you back a little, is on the issue of how does the business community see, if this is where Parliament is going with this issue, what they will do in terms of the structure, the business structure that has to go beyond that. And secondly, if I could just throw that in, so that you deal with it in one. Also the issue of, because we're talking about what is going right with it before we get on to some of the more negative stuff. In terms of, let's talk dollars, in terms of business, isn't there some benefit to the tourism industry? At the courts, many times we see tourists who are caught up in the court system, miss their cruise ship, and all the complications with that. So, could you answer those two things?
Sure, gladly. I mentioned the Jamaica experience, the limited exposure I have had to the Jamaica experience in my research. But Jamaica was very, very broad in its approach. They set up an authority. They recognized that quality control was going to be very important for them, because they didn't want to have a bad name, bad reputation. They recognized that certain people and certain cultures use marijuana as a part of their religious rituals. And they addressed supply. How did they address supply? They allowed persons to have, I think, 5 plants, if I'm not mistaken.
3 or 5.
Huh?
The foreign minister was here, I think she said 3 plants.
3, whatever, okay? So they were very broad and comprehensive in their approach. They never do it piecemeal. One would have thought that because legislatively we look to our Caribbean brothers so often, one would have thought that we could have looked to Jamaica and learned from that experience. and improved it if it needed to be improved. So again, we say that there's so much more that could have been done, and this piece of legislation raises more questions and answers. Back to the business side of it now. While we focus primarily on the content that was in my presentation, there were other concerns that were raised. Not only how it would affect the workforce, not only how it would affect people that operated dangerous, heavy machinery, public transportation, even driving. One of our studies suggested that it affected your ability to drive. But because of the international laws and rules, we are very concerned about being listed, sorry, not black labeled. Black labeled. Well, I mean,
that's a different drug.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
I mean, having been labeled on this blacklist, it wasn't one word. It wasn't black labeled. It was black labeled. About this delisting, because if the sale of this drug is illegal, remains illegal, and the proceeds from those sales would be illegal.
Absolutely.
The source of funds need to be disclosed. I'm understanding now, even looking at the US legislation, that a lot of their industry that has begun to grow in this area remains a cash business.
Correct.
Because the funds cannot be deposited. And if they get deposited into a banking institution, that banking institution can run into problems with this de-risking.
Correct.
We don't want to see that.
Yeah.
There's too much legitimate business in this country. And if you're so concerned about protecting our tourism market, which is a valuable market for us, tourism as it is, then wouldn't you want to do everything to not expose your tourists to illegal activities? You would want to have it in an environment where what they're doing is legal. And you don't want to expose them to the criminal elements that spike our crime numbers and our murder numbers, do you? So there's a lot more that needs to be done, Attorney. I'm sorry. And there's a lot more that should have been done.
Absolutely.
If we're so concerned about protecting not only our children, but protecting our business. There's one more point from a business standpoint that we really drove home. We invest, and I use the word invest, 25% or more of our budget on young people in this country. That's significant. We invest $250 million plus, north of $250 million a year in children. And we expect to see good results from that investment. But if we're shackling, if we're retarding the ability of our children from the get-go, because we don't do enough to expose them to the things that they should be exposed to, or we don't do enough to stop them from being exposed to the things that they shouldn't be exposed to. And I'm including alcohol, I'm including cigarettes, and I'm including marijuana for the purposes of this, or any other drug that affects their health and their development. Then we're failing, because we're making an investment and we're not protecting it.
Now, I've heard you say several times so far about the amendment or the legislation as it is now not going far enough. And you expressed these concerns in your presentation in the Senate. From your consultations with the business senator, what are some of the definitive additions you would like to see to the legislation? I'm hearing regulation very clearly as one. Tell me what you would like to see added to this amendment to feel that it would be meeting the needs of all the concerns you've been speaking of?
One of the primary things that we came out with was we said that anybody that profits from harm to our children should be dealt with severely under the law. We have no excuse for that. Absolutely none. They should have a criminal record. They should be prosecuted. They should be sent to jail. Okay? Sorry.
I want to jump in there because I know one of the things, and you are a representative of the business community, and I think the statement that you said is so powerful, but we also know the issue that comes with alcohol as well. It is being supplied by the business community. So how do you ensure that that very same message that you're speaking of when it comes to marijuana is also instilled within the business community when it comes to drugs like alcohol or substances like alcohol?
Again, please, we're going back to that same.
I agree.
We're going back to the same
I
fallacy
agree,
that
but
one is worse than the other,
I'm not
or
saying
less
one is
worse.
worse than the other.
No,
I'm saying
but
if there's a policy of what is bad for children,
So consistent,
that
right.
is across the board.
what is on the books is, to me, can be a whole other discussion. We've acknowledged clearly, and I've just said it, that there is sufficient scientific evidence that alcohol does severe
Yes.
damage, that cigarettes does severe damage. I mean, and marijuana
Yes.
does severe damage. Okay, so and they have different causes and different effects, right?
Absolutely.
One may affect your motor skills right now, and I really don't want to go into the medical aspects and the medical
Science.
harm, right? And the
I
science
don't
of
think,
it.
I don't think I'm disputing
Yeah.
the damage that can be done by these
But,
types of
but as
substances
far
to
as I
children.
know, to answer you more specifically,
Yes.
alcohol should not be sold to young people. Neither should cigarettes, neither should marijuana. They should not have access to it. And perhaps the law, if there is such a high use of alcohol in this country by young people, as both studies show, then the law needs to be tightened and addressed. You don't use the softening of your position on marijuana, which was totally illegal, as a justification, for saying, well, because studies show that they're exposed to alcohol and marijuana is less worse in the short term or whatever, So to me, they're all bad. And if you need to address the alcohol abuse in our country by children, then address it. But it's a separate issue. You have to be able to separate the issues.
In terms of, you're saying that you ought not to soften your position, but could one argue that the law now reflects the current reality that there are, in terms of drug usage, particularly that particular substance, that the population in Belize who are using that substance is probably at that level, maybe reflective of where the law is going? And two, because I want to make it very specific to your expertise in the business community, who better to tell us in terms of where and who is using than the business community, because there are contingent businesses connected to the use of marijuana. What it is smoked in, maybe lighters. So the business community can very well tell us, listen, the use of marijuana, because I also sell Fonto, I also sell paper, or I also sell chalices, or I also sell. So the business community is in a good position to tell us that maybe it's not a softening of the position, but it's more so a true reflection of what is happening in Belize. Do you accept that?
I would say that you cast a wide brush just now with business community and you expect a lot of information from us. I would think that the authorities that regulate and document the importation into this country would be able to tell you how much funds come in better than the business community. We don't have access to that statistics and that information, or ready access to it. That information certainly the government officials would have.
You have access to sales though, so you can see.
But when you say the business community, you're talking about, you're painting a very wide brush. The associations that I represent may not have direct access to that information. Maybe there are other organizations that represent those businesses that could give you the information. But I would send you, my suggestion would be that information could be had from the Customs Department, for example. What was the other part of your question?
Well, it's just in terms of whether or not it is not necessarily a softening, but a true reflection of...
No, well, again, that is where the political climate comes in. And we acknowledge that there's, it seems, political support for this position.
Well, there's bipartisan support for it.
Sorry?
I mean,
there was bipartisan
support.
support. I mean, the voices of opposition or the voices of caution, to me, because I didn't hear anybody totally oppose it on, well, except Pastor Rock, which said that they couldn't support anything that was illegal, and perhaps if so. But what I heard and what I presented was, in fact, look, we need to discuss it more. We need to look at certain things. We need to address certain realities. We need to protect our investment in our children. It's an investment. That's the future of our country, right? So we have to protect it. We spend over a quarter of our national budget educating kids. Scientific studies have clearly linked that there is cognitive damage to children. So we're trying to educate them on one hand, and on the other hand, they may be limited in their ability to observe because they've been affected cognitively. We also highlighted that there's sufficient medical studies to show that when you grow up in an environment that you're not properly, let's say, sociological environment, or even they call it nurturing and naturing. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you don't receive enough food, if you don't receive proper diet, proper bath, you live poor. Remember, 50% of our people live below the poverty line, or near 50%. If you don't live in an environment that you have love and care, you lose the ability to develop certain parts of your brain. You lose the ability to reason sometimes. You lose the ability to have empathy, to understand concepts. So you double whammy this now. You double whammy this with having exposure.
If they're exposed to
yes, if they're exposed, right? And then you present the scenario there is a perfect, 1-2 punch, knockout punch for the young people of this country that we need to protect and help, right? So that was our point from a business standpoint, because we're investing it's the single largest investment we make in this country is in our children. And we should protect them at all. I'm a grandfather now,
A very proud one, we know that. Yeah.
So please excuse me if I seem to be a little passionate on this subject. Well, but you want to give them every opportunity, Marilyn. I cannot underscore this.
That's necessary.
In your presentation, you cited 2 studies out of Belize that looked at the drug use in Belize, including the use of marijuana. And you said people questioned the validity of your studies. I can say at least that both these studies have been discussed on this very same show by the representatives of NDAC, and I believe the other was a social worker out of one of the universities. What it did show is, yes, there is a problem with the use of substances within schools. And in fact, in one of those studies, they even talked about people starting to sniff different illegal substances. That's the level of exposure that children have at this time. My question to you is, with or without the amendment, there is exposure. So how do you use that as your justification as to why this amendment doesn't go far enough? Why not take a position instead, or offer financial support as a business community to assist in enforcement?
Marlene, oh my goodness, you have opened up yourself for so much just now.
Me?
Careful,
I asked
Marlene.
the questions.
If that is your concern, then why open it up? Why not close it? Why not do something and introduce programs along with this? That, okay, fine, adults, you can use it, but these are the things we're going to do to protect our children. For all the things that you mentioned, we don't see any of that. One, as to the business community contributing, who you think contribute to the majority of these taxes, please. Okay? So we feel that we're already overburdened. We've made presentations on this show in regards to that already. We're paying approximately 33%, okay, to our government. 33% of GDP goes to our government in taxes. Now, what we need is a different approach, obviously, because the approach we're using right now is not working. The crime rates clearly shows it. The murder rate clearly shows it. We need to have more debate. I personally don't believe that there was enough debate with that group that you mentioned earlier. And certainly there was not enough communication. Again, I go back to the Jamaican experience that you highlighted, that they tried to be fairly comprehensive and tried to cover this thing from all the different angles. Unless you address supply, you leave a huge gaping hole open for crime to continue. What has been happening is that the perception is at least that the use is going to go up. Not my perception of the gangs and perceptions of the people who are in the supply business, because they've escalated. They're trying desperately now to protect turf, to get turf, to gain turf, because they're expecting, right, this market swing. That is what is happening. Okay? So you have to recognize all these things. Now, we're spending a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort in policing without addressing the roots, causes. Not just roots, causes. And that is a whole other conversation that could take us days. But until we start to address the roots, anything else we do is just superficial. And it could even be a political ploy. I'm sorry to say so. Right? It could just be another way of appeasing another block of persons. So, because we did not give it the serious attention it deserves, this piece of legislation, we failed. We have failed our children, we have failed our society, we have failed to address the criminal impact that this is going to bring, we've failed to address the tourism thing that you're talking, we've failed to address so many other areas that should have been addressed in legislation of this gravity. Right? It falls way short in so many ways, attorney.
So,
right? In addressing so many things.
So many issues and concerns.
Right? And that is my job.
So
that is my job. My job is not to go there and to
Rubber stamp
Yes.
everything.
exactly to rubber stamp everything.
This is what
my
we
job
expect of our
is
senators.
to go. Thank you very much,
Absolutely.
Marlene. I think
That's
you would
what
be
we do.
you are
disappointed.
not a rubber stamp.
Thank you.
You've said it repeatedly,
Right?
but let me ask you this.
So
And it
can I
brings
just
balance.
Finish your point.
And it
yeah.
brings balance.
Yeah. So I would be failing in my responsibilities if I did not highlight those issues that I think we should have addressed.
So what do you do now?
Wow.
Is the business
Let's be-
let me give an
Let-
example.
uh-huh.
The private sector has a direct link with the office of the Prime Minister. Do you use these particular outlets to lobby to perhaps enhance what has already been established
Let's
in
be
the
real.
amendment?
You know the private sector's position on many things that we've been lobbying for, we've been making press releases for, we've been continually trying to impress upon the populace, upon the politicians, of so many other major things that need to be addressed in this country, Marlene. Mm-hmm. And you know what our success rate is. So, what happens now? The reality is that the political will prevail. They will be the ones that will decide if and when we look at this. I think that for now what we need to do is we need to await the regulations, and we need to see what provisions are made in the regulations. I'm hoping that you see a lot of strength in the regulations for clarity, for legal clarity in so many areas as well, Attorney. So, you know, I think we have to wait now and see. It's passed. It's a done deal. This is going to go through. Nothing that I say or do or the chamber says or do or any release from the chamber is going to change that fact. It enjoyed bipartisan support. If it had only enjoyed government support, it would have still gone through. So all we can do now is wait for the regulations to come out, pass our comments on those, see if they can, if we can influence strengthening or change there, and if not.
Senator, is there a more proactive approach that the chamber could take? For example, we've seen in the past where the business community have actually put up position papers when the issue came up with the budget and the deficit. I was quite proud of the business community, but you guys said, no, if you look here, you can move this to there, you can move this to there, we can make this work. To follow up a question that Marlene asked, in terms of what would you like to see in there, rather than sitting back, could not the business community put a position paper together to say, in Jamaica this is happening, in Colorado this is happening. We would like to see these positive things from these areas. Since the political will is already there, we'd like to see these things included in regulations. And so we're going to help you. The way we've helped you, held your hand in all different areas, and even if you don't take our position and our recommendations, they're here written on a document. Could that not be a proactive way, particularly because one of the most powerful voices in this whole commission is somebody who's from the business community, Mr. Doug Singh. So there is that link that we've been speaking of. Could not the chamber take, and the business community take, a proactive approach to these regulations?
Again, we did. We asked certain questions of the committee that were unanswered. Can we do more now? Of course we can do more. The resources of the chamber are constantly being exhausted in causes that we believe will strengthen our democracy and our country. That's all we do. Okay? So now, how much money and how much time and how much resource of our limited resources will we dedicate to this? That's a question for the business community, not for the business community. Senator, I don't think I don't get involved in the day to day. But your point is taken,
Yeah.
and you know,
And
the chamber is
research
consumed. We have so many other issues on the plate, as you well know. So.
Yeah.
Please give us a bly on this one.
And we'll get you back for those as well, don't you worry. But I think fundamentally what we wanted to hear were the different opinions coming out of this particular issue. And while it does enjoy bipartisan support, we knew the churches would take a negative position. And obviously, having given your presentation in the Senate, where you speak of being in support because of certain efforts that are trying to be made through the amendment, you still have major concerns, and hopefully those have fallen on the right ears this morning.
Hopefully.
All right. Thank you very much for being here this morning.
Thank you
Too. Thank you so much. Nice
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. But before we do, we have a special presentation for you. It is Halloween, of course, and we have a scary dance lined up for you. This is going to be done by the BES Dance Troupe. And let me tell you, it's going to be spooky. So check it out now, and then we're going to go right. Actually, what we'll do, we'll go ahead and take that break. When we come back, we'll open with that presentation. So stay tuned. To play that longer, girls.